I once watched a diver on a liveaboard 3 hours from shore open his gear bag and realize his regulator was still hanging in his garage. That's the kind of moment that can define a trip for all the wrong reasons. My name is Marcus Okafor, and after a decade of traveling to dive sites across 6 continents, I've seen every packing mistake imaginable and made a fair number myself. You're listening to the Scuba Gear Lab podcast. Quick note before we get started. Everything you hear in this episode, all the research, the data, the script, that's written and verified by real people who actually dive. The voice you're hearing is AI generated, but the content itself is 100% human work. Just wanted to be upfront about that. Now, if you've been listening for a while, thank you, genuinely. It's great having people come back week after week. And if this is your first episode, welcome aboard. We release new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, covering scuba gear, equipment reviews, maintenance, all the practical stuff you need when you're actually diving. Let's jump into this one. This isn't about cramming everything you own into an oversized roller bag. It's about systematic preparation that accounts for your specific dive profile, destination conditions, and the reality that checked luggage sometimes takes scenic detours without you. This checklist covers life support equipment, exposure protection, accessories, documentation, and the often overlooked items that separate smooth dive trips from frustrating ones. Whether you're headed to tropical reefs or cold water wrecks, traveling light or bringing a full camera rig, the framework stays the same. Pack deliberately, verify functionality before you leave, and understand what you absolutely cannot replace at your destination. Now, let's talk about core life support equipment. Your regulator, BCD, and dive computer form the foundation of your kit. These are the items you should almost always travel with rather than rent, assuming you own quality gear that's properly maintained. Starting with your regulator system, I pack mine only after confirming it's within the manufacturer's service interval. That's typically 12 to 24 months, depending on usage and manufacturer specs. Part of that process includes documenting your last service date. If you're close to needing service, get it done before the trip. A first-stage failure in Cozumel means finding a shop that may or may not have parts for your specific model. Check that your regulator connection matches the destination standard. I keep a DIN to yoke adapter in my Save a Dive kit because I dive DIN primarily, but encounter yoke-only operations occasionally in resort areas. For your BCD, go beyond just throwing it in the bag. Run through your pre-dive check at home. I inflate fully and let it sit for 20 minutes. Any pressure loss indicates an oral inflator seal or dump valve issue you want to discover in your living room, not on a dive deck. For travel, I prefer back inflate or wing-style BCDs that compress smaller than jacket-style models. My current travel setup weighs 4.2 pounds and packs into a space smaller than a basketball. Your dive computer needs a fresh battery and you need a backup unit. I travel with my primary wrist-mounted computer and a backup console-style computer, both verified functional within 48 hours of departure. Battery life degrades unpredictably, and I've seen computers die mid-trip often enough that I now replace batteries prophylactically before any extended travel, even if the low battery indicator hasn't triggered yet. Verify that algorithms match your planned diving. If you're doing nitrox dives, confirm the unit properly displays and calculates enriched air mixes. I learned this the expensive way when a computer defaulted to air-only mode and I didn't notice until after a 32% nitrox dive in Bonaire. Even if you dive a computer with wireless air integration, pack a standalone submersible pressure gauge as backup. The battery in wireless transmitters fails at inconvenient times, and not every dive operation stocks replacements for every brand. My SPG lives permanently attached to my regulator first stage. It's a simple analog gauge with a brass spool and no failure points beyond the hose itself. If you're using tables rather than computers, you'll need a depth gauge and timing device. This applies primarily to divers using tables, but I include it because I occasionally revert to tables and mechanical gauges when teaching or when I want redundancy on technical dives. A simple analog depth gauge and a dive watch provide absolute reliability. No batteries, no algorithms, no electronics that can flood or corrode. I pack a 4-foot or longer surface marker buoy in high visibility orange, along with a 100-foot spool or reel. Current and boat traffic make surface markers essential in many environments, and deployment techniques vary enough that you want your own familiar equipment rather than borrowing someone else's setup mid-dive. I've had to deploy SMBs in 3-knot currents at dusk and in choppy surface conditions. Having gear you've practiced with repeatedly makes the difference between a smooth ascent and a panicked one. Your exposure suit needs to be appropriate to destination temperatures, and your checklist should specify exactly which suit you're packing, rather than just wetsuit. For tropical diving, water temps above 78 degrees, I bring a 3mm full suit that provides sun protection and thermal comfort without overheating. Cold water environments below 60 degrees mean my 7mm suit or dry suit, plus appropriate undergarments. The critical step here is verifying seals, zippers, and seams before packing, especially on dry suits, where a failed neck seal or torn wrist seal turns an expensive piece of equipment into a very uncomfortable swim. Moving on to accessories and backup equipment. The items in this category won't prevent you from diving, but their absence will limit your enjoyment, safety margin, or ability to handle minor equipment issues that would otherwise become trip-ending problems. I pack 2 masks always, my primary low-volume mask that I've used for years, and a backup of similar fit. Mask straps break, silicone skirts tear on sharp edges, and tempered glass can shatter if you drop the mask on a tile floor. I've done this. I apply a thin layer of anti-fog coating or use diluted baby shampoo before every dive, rather than relying on saliva or abrasive toothpaste methods that degrade the skirt material over time. Both masks go in a hard case or wrapped in my wetsuit to prevent damage during transport. For fins, spring straps fail less frequently than rubber straps, but I've seen both types break. I pack my primary fins plus either backup straps or, if space permits, a compact set of travel fins. For warm water destinations where I'm not diving heavy steel tanks and thick exposure suits, compact split fins or shorter bladed fins work fine and pack smaller than my cold water paddle fins. Check the mounting points where straps attach to the blade. Stress cracks in this area indicate imminent failure. A cutting tool should be accessible and corrosion-free. A dive knife or shears should be sharp, rust-free, and mounted in a location you can reach with either hand. I prefer shears for line cutting because they're more effective against fishing line and nets than knives. I pack them in checked luggage to avoid TSA confiscation. Before packing, I verify the blade moves freely and hasn't corroded. Stainless steel isn't truly rust-proof, and saltwater dives without proper rinsing create corrosion surprisingly fast. Even on tropical day dives, a light reveals colors at depth and illuminates crevices and overhangs. I pack a primary canister or handheld light with recently charged batteries, plus a compact backup light. Battery chemistry matters here. Lithium-ion cells can't go in checked luggage unless installed in the device, so I keep lights assembled and verified functional. I carry lights that use standard AA or AAA batteries when traveling internationally, since proprietary rechargeable cells are nearly impossible to replace if you have a failure mid-trip. Underwater communication beyond basic hand signals requires either a slate or wet erasable notebook. I use both depending on dive type. a small wrist-mounted slate for simple notes and compass headings, and a larger notepad for navigation exercises or when I need to explain something complex to a student. These weigh almost nothing and take up minimal space, but you'll want them when you need to communicate something specific to your buddy at depth. I verify my compass against a known heading before travel. Compasses can develop bubbles or lose calibration if exposed to strong magnetic fields or temperature extremes. Most modern dive computers include electronic compasses, but I still pack a standalone liquid-filled compass as backup. Electronic compasses require calibration in each new location and drain battery life. Mechanical compasses just work. Some environments benefit from a reef hook that lets you secure yourself to rock or dead coral while observing pelagics without fighting current. Palau channels, Galapagos upwellings, drift dives in strong current. Not every destination allows these. Many Caribbean reef systems prohibit them to prevent coral damage, so verify regulations before packing. Mine is a simple stainless steel hook with 6 feet of webbing and a clip. Let's talk about your Save a Dive kit and maintenance items. This is where systematic packing prevents minor issues from becoming dive day problems. I assemble my Save a Dive kit at home and verify contents before each trip rather than trying to remember individual items while packing under deadline pressure. I carry a variety pack of O-rings that includes the most common sizes: port plug O-rings, HP and LP port O-rings, and O-rings for my specific regulator's second stage exhaust valve and first stage environmental seal. These are sized in millimeters, typically ranging from 008 to 018 in AS568 sizing, and having the wrong size is nearly as useless as having none. I learned this after trying to use an 010 O-ring on a port that required an 009. It sealed initially, but extruded under pressure during the dive. I keep these organized in a small plastic case with labeled compartments. A tiny amount of oxygen-compatible silicone grease, not petroleum-based, goes a long way for lubricating O-rings during installation. The tube I pack is smaller than a lipstick container and has lasted me 3 years of regular travel. This is also useful for lubricating BCD inflator buttons that start to stick from salt exposure. Pack mask strap and fin strap replacements pre-sized to your specific mask and fins. Generic straps exist, but they don't always fit properly, and fighting with ill-fitting equipment on a dive deck while everyone else enters the water is frustrating. I keep these in a separate waterproof pouch along with the small amount of hardware needed to install them. Cable ties solve an impressive variety of problems: securing hoses that have come loose from retainers, replacing failed clips, temporarily repairing broken buckles, or jury-rigging camera mounts. I pack 10 to 15 in various sizes, from small 4-inch ties to heavy-duty 12-inch versions. LP inflator hoses fail more often than other hoses because of the constant connection-disconnection cycle and the mechanical stress on the coupling. A replacement hose runs around $30 to $40 and weighs maybe 4 ounces. Cheap insurance compared to missing dives because your BCD won't hold air. Make sure it's the correct length and has the proper coupling for your inflator mechanism. My regulator's first stage requires a 9/16-inch wrench to swap HP and LP ports if I need to reconfigure hose routing. I pack a small adjustable wrench that handles this, plus fin strap screws and tank valve handles that occasionally come loose. Some divers prefer multi-tools designed for diving. I find them bulky and prefer purpose-specific tools that work better. Regulator mouthpieces tear or develop cracks, especially after years of use, or if you have a habit of gripping the mouthpiece too hard at depth. Guilty. A replacement takes seconds to install with hot water to soften the silicone and costs around a few dollars. I've needed this exactly 3 times in my diving career, which is 3 times more than I would have wanted to skip dives because of a $5 part. Waterproof repair tape is different from duct tape. It maintains adhesion when wet and can temporarily patch torn wetsuit neoprene, repair leaking hose connections, or secure equipment that's come loose. The roll I carry is about the size of a roll of dental floss and has fixed everything from suit tears to leaking camera housing latches. The latter bought me enough time to finish a dive day before sending the housing for proper repair. Now for documentation, certification, and medical items. Every destination has different requirements, but these items form the universal baseline for documentation and basic medical preparation. I carry my physical certification card and keep a photo of it on my phone as backup. Some dive operators now accept digital certifications through apps like PADI's digital certification system, but not universally, especially at smaller operations in remote locations. If you're certified for specialties relevant to your planned diving, nitrox, deep, rec, bring those cards too. I've seen divers turned away from advanced dives because they couldn't produce proof of training. Many operators require a minimum number of logged dives within the past 12 months, especially for challenging sites. I maintain a digital log as primary record and carry a small physical logbook with my last year of dives as backup. For technical dives, or when claiming specific experience levels, detailed logs matter. Vague, "I think I've done about 50 dives," doesn't inspire confidence from a dive master evaluating whether you should be on a deep wreck penetration dive. Some operators require medical clearance for divers over certain ages or with specific health conditions. If you have any medical considerations that affect diving, ear problems, respiratory issues, cardiovascular concerns, carry documentation from a dive medicine qualified physician. This is distinct from your general doctor. Dive medicine involves understanding pressure-related physiology that most primary care physicians don't regularly encounter. I carry my Divers Alert Network membership card and have their emergency hotline number saved in my phone. Dan provides dive accident insurance and medical evacuation coverage that standard travel insurance typically excludes. The membership card includes your policy number and emergency contacts, information you definitely don't want to be searching for if you're dealing with decompression illness symptoms. Beyond standard first aid supplies, adhesive bandages, antiseptic, pain relievers, I pack items specifically useful for diving injuries: antibiotic ointment for coral scrapes, antihistamine for marine stings, seasickness medication, decongestant for ear clearing issues, and antidiarrheal medication, because food safety varies dramatically across destinations, and you don't want to be dealing with intestinal issues while trying to equalize at depth. I also pack a few doses of pseudoephedrine, which helps with congestion-related ear clearing problems, though I use this cautiously since it can mask symptoms that should actually keep you out of the water. Carry prescription medications in original bottles with your name clearly visible, along with a letter from your physician explaining what they are and why you take them. Some countries have strict regulations about importing certain medications, and customs officials have broad authority to confiscate anything that looks questionable. I learned this watching a diver lose a week's worth of allergy medication at a customs checkpoint because the pills were in an unlabeled pill organizer. Certain destinations require proof of specific vaccinations: yellow fever, hepatitis, typhoid. Requirements change, so verify current regulations well before your departure. Some vaccines require multiple doses over several weeks, so last-minute planning doesn't work. If you shoot underwater, let me cover camera and photography equipment. Your photography gear often weighs and occupies more space than your life support equipment. These are the critical items that belong on every dive trip packing list for photographers. I verify battery charge and memory cards 24 hours before departure, then shoot a few test frames to confirm everything's functioning. Camera electronics are sensitive to humidity and temperature extremes, and I've seen cameras that worked fine at home fail in tropical heat or after exposure to condensation. Bring at least one spare battery, preferably two, and more memory card capacity than you think you'll need. Cards fail, fill up faster than expected, or get lost. Never pack your camera housing without inspecting the main O-ring seal under good lighting and performing a vacuum test if your housing supports it. I examine the O-ring for any sand, hair, or damage, apply a thin layer of O-ring grease, and seat it carefully. Then, I close the housing empty and submerge it in my bathtub for 30 minutes, watching for bubbles. Any bubble formation indicates a seal failure that would flood your camera at depth. Housing floods are both common and entirely preventable. Lighting equipment is bulky, but essential for quality images below about 30 feet, where natural light loses red wavelengths and everything trends blue-green. I pack my strobes with diffusers, spare sync cords, these fail regularly, and all mounting hardware, including clamps and arms. Whichever you're bringing, verify sync connections before packing. A strobe that won't fire because of a corroded sync connector is dead weight. Dome ports for wide angle, flat ports for macro, and these are not interchangeable. I once traveled with a macro port when I'd planned wide-angle shooting, which made for a very expensive lesson in double-checking port selection before departure. Ports are fragile, so I pack them wrapped in neoprene or foam and positioned in the center of my gear bag where they're protected from impact. Condensation inside your housing ruins shots and can indicate humidity that risks flood damage. I pack several fresh desiccant packets and replace them daily while shooting. Anti-fog inserts for the inside of your housing prevent condensation on the back of your viewing screen. Minor issue on land, major problem when you're trying to check focus and exposure at depth. Wet lens ports are inevitable, but having the right tools to clean them between dives isn't. I pack microfiber cloths, multiple since they get saturated, lens cleaning solution, and a small blower for removing water droplets without smearing. I also carry spare O-rings specifically for my housing model. These are different sizes and materials than regulator O-rings and aren't interchangeable. Here's my final check before I go. Pull out your dive gear bag and physically verify each category rather than checking items mentally. Life support systems functional. Regulator breathing smoothly, BCD holding air, computer powering on with correct settings, SPG reading accurately when pressurized. Exposure protection intact, no torn seams, functioning zippers, seals properly lubricated on dry suit. Save a dive kit complete. O-rings, straps, tools, repair supplies all present and organized. Documentation current. C-card, medical clearance, insurance cards, dive log with recent entries. Batteries charged and spares packed. Computer, lights, camera, strobes all verified functional. Destination-specific items added. Reef hook, if allowed, specific adapter plugs for electronics charging, current appropriate exposure suit thickness. I also weigh my checked bag at this stage. Airline weight limits are firm, and discovering your gear bag is 8 pounds overweight while standing in the check-in line is stressful and expensive. I use a luggage scale at home and pack knowing I can add a few pounds of souvenirs or impulse dive shot purchases on the return trip without exceeding limits. The night before departure, I verify weather conditions at my destination and make any last-minute adjustments. If water temperatures have dropped, I add a hood or hooded vest. If conditions look choppy, I add extra seasickness medication. These small adjustments based on current rather than forecasted conditions have saved multiple trips from being less comfortable than they should have been. Let me address some frequently asked questions. Should you pack your regulator in carry-on or checked luggage? You should pack your regulator in carry-on luggage whenever possible to prevent damage and ensure you have it if your checked bag is delayed or lost. Regulators contain precision components and pressure-sensitive parts that can be damaged by rough baggage handling, and losing a regulator at your destination means either renting unfamiliar equipment or missing dives entirely while waiting for your bag to arrive. I've had checked bags delayed for 3 days while on a week-long dive trip, and having my regulator, computer, and mask in my carry-on meant I could dive using rental BCDs and fins while waiting for the rest of my gear. How far in advance should you service your regulator before a dive trip? You should service your regulator at least 2 weeks before a major dive trip to allow time for parts ordering, service completion, and verification of proper function through several local dives. Most regulators require service every 12 to 24 months or every 100 hours of use, and you want that service fresh but tested before you travel. Having your regulator serviced the day before departure means you haven't verified the technician's work through actual diving. I've learned this through watching a student's freshly serviced regulator develop a slow leak during our first dive after service, discovered because we'd had time for checkout dives before traveling. The regulator service process includes break-in time, where new seals seat properly, and any assembly errors typically reveal themselves. What items should you absolutely never pack in checked luggage? Never pack dive computers, certification cards, prescription medications, or camera electronics in checked luggage, as these items are either irreplaceable at your destination or represent significant cost and trip disruption if your bag is lost or delayed. I also keep my mask, regulator, and a basic swimsuit in carry-on, which means even if every checked bag vanishes, I can still dive using rental equipment rather than sitting out entirely. Airlines lose approximately 7 bags per 1,000 passengers, according to industry statistics, which sounds low until it's your bag that's touring a different continent while you're standing at a dive resort without your gear. Wrapping this up, your dive gear bag packing checklist becomes more refined with every trip. You'll discover which items you consistently need, which you never touch, and what's worth the extra weight versus what's replaceable at your destination. I still use essentially the same checklist framework I developed years ago, but the specific items have evolved as my diving has shifted from mostly warm water recreational diving to incorporating more cold water technical work and underwater photography. The goal isn't to pack for every conceivable scenario, it's to pack systematically for your specific trip while building in reasonable redundancy for items that would end your diving if they failed. That means spare O-rings and mask straps, but probably not a backup BCD. It means your primary regulator and computer, but rental fins if necessary to stay under weight limits. And it absolutely means documenting service dates, verifying battery levels, and testing critical equipment before you leave home, rather than discovering problems on a dive deck with 20 other divers waiting to get in the water. Start your checklist based on these categories, then customize it based on your experience. After each trip, I note what I didn't need, what I wished I'd brought, and what failed or caused problems. That running record has prevented me from repeating mistakes and helped me refine my packing down to only items I actually use. Your version will look different based on whether you're diving cold water versus tropical, bringing camera gear versus staying light, or prioritizing checked bag weight versus carry-on flexibility. But the systematic approach remains the same. That wraps up this episode of the Scuba Gear Lab podcast. Thanks for listening all the way through. We're back every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday with new episodes, so there's always something coming up if you're hungry for more gear talk. If you found this one useful, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a 5-star rating and write a quick review. It genuinely helps other divers find the show when they're searching for equipment info, and it tells the podcast platforms that people actually want to hear this stuff. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe or follow so you get notified the second a new episode drops. Appreciate you being here. See you next time.